150 years ago, 3 gifted sisters lived in this remote place. It was a world dominated by books. From childhood, they all read voraciously, and in turn, they created their own stories. The sisters turned their isolated home into a factory of the imagination. From inside their minds, they conjured up new worlds and unique characters. They were the Bronte sisters, authors of masterpieces such as Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. For all their love of books, the Brontes could have had no idea what happened inside their brains when they read and imagined. Only now, modern neuroscience has shown that the effects of reading can be more extraordinary than they could ever have dreamt. New imaging technology like fMRI scanning allows us to observe the living brain at work. It's shown that reading, something most of us take for granted, can help unlock remarkable powers. Reading builds new connections in the brain, which in turn allow us to use written words as stepping stones to understand other people's worlds. A good book literally has the power to change you. But the technological ingenuity that's given us brain imaging has also spawned fabulous new media, the internet, blogs and video games. It's a digital revolution that some think challenges the old world of reading. Time to show why, more than ever, reading matters. I've always been fascinated by the way that things work, which is why I write about science. The most fascinating thing of all is this, the human brain. It's probably the most complex machine in the universe, and in some ways it's the most powerful too. In fact, it's so powerful, it's even starting to understand itself. When I started writing about psychology, the brain was effectively a black box. We knew what it looked like inside, but what was going on in there was anybody's guess. We could only surmise it from the behavior that it produced. But that changed in the 90s when we got new imaging technology which, for the first time, could look inside a working, living brain and see what was going on. Since then, we've learnt a great deal about the brain, including the surprising extent to which it's shaped, quite literally, by experience. Lots of our cognitive skills, like speech, for example, are wired in, but others have to be custom built into each individual. And these include what is perhaps the most crucial one of all, our ability to read. And that's why, although most of us take it for granted, reading is so remarkable. Reading and writing don't come naturally, so to do it, the brain must change.
Human beings were never born to read. We were born to speak. We were born to see, smell, hear, but never read. What the human brain had to do was to rearrange its existing parts.
So, how did the human brain that evolved to speak make the leap to literacy? How did our brains get from recognizing this to knowing what these abstract marks on a page sound like and understanding what they mean? The first clue comes from the long history of our species. Our distant ancestors lived by hunting. That may not seem to have much to do with reading a book, but successful hunting depends on visual skills that would tens of thousands of years later prime the mind to read. These early humans needed to recognize fine differences between shapes, say between a useful stick and a deadly snake. Barely visible animal tracks could warn of danger or of opportunity, and honing these visual skills could mean the difference between life and death. Then, 5,000 years ago, those skills were adapted to serve another purpose altogether when we invented the alphabet and started to read. Ancient hunters became modern readers.
Part of the reading process involves areas that were and are being used for object recognition. So our ability to use our visual areas to immediately know whether that object is prey or predator is actually being recycled for us and able to be automatically recognizing symbols.
Today, it's impossible to imagine a world without trillions of words on street signs and hoardings, in newspapers, books, magazines, and on the internet. We live in a world saturated with written language. So, how did the brain get rewired to read? To understand how we do new things, which we do constantly, you need to know two key things about the brain. One is that it's modular. That is, different bits of it specialise in doing different things. And the other is that it's plastic. The bits change. The modules work together to produce an almost infinite range of behaviour. You could think of it as a sort of Lego set that can be built up to do one thing and then dismantled and built again in a different way to do something else entirely. Same bits, different function. One of the most dramatic demonstrations of the brain's ability to reshape itself came from some surprising subjects, London cabbies. Their brains provided the living data for a now famous piece of neuroscientific detective work. It looked at a bit of their brain called the hippocampus. It's the bit sort of right in here. And it's the bit that we all use when we're finding our way about. It helps to code and retrieve knowledge about space. Of course, taxi drivers know more about that than any of us because they have to do this thing called the knowledge, which involves 2 years of becoming familiar with all the back streets of London. What the researchers found when they looked at the cab driver's hippocampus was that that bit of the brain was measurably bigger than it is in ordinary people. Right now, if you looked at this guy's brain in a scanner, you'd see that his hippocampus is firing away like crazy as he finds his way around these streets. And it's that constant firing away in a particular bit of the brain that builds that area up and makes the module particularly strong. The taxi driver study shows that the human brain can adapt to fresh challenges. In the case of these cabbies, storing an entire map of London streets inside their heads. So does that mean that our brains have a special part, like the hippocampus, that gets muscled up to read? So often in the study of the mind, the most revealing clues have come from brains that, for some reason, can no longer perform particular tasks. Last year, Terry Jones attended a friend's 40th birthday party. The day after, he woke to find the world had changed.
The next morning, I got up and go and have a shower, and I couldn't read what was a shower and what was a shampoo and anything else. It was just in another language. And I said to my partner, I said, they bought some cheap little shampoo. Can't read it, it must all be in a foreign language. And she just laughed, she said, oh, don't be stupid. And anyway, she said, no, it's all right. And she said, I know you're joking. I said, okay. Anyway, I wasn't, but I just couldn't read it. So we went downstairs to breakfast, and we got the menu, and I just couldn't read anything. It just looked as though it was another language.
So when you looked at the letters, what did you actually see?
I could see letters, and it could say breakfast, and I could read letters, but those letters didn't make a word. Do you understand what I mean?
So could you understand that B was B and R was R?
I could understand the B and the R, but I couldn't put them together to make any sense. It was though it was another language. I just couldn't read as a word. Checked in the hospital and had the various tests, and